Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive shift happening right above our heads. For decades, we've looked up at the stars and seen a peaceful void meant for scientific discovery and international cooperation. But the reality up there is changing, and it is changing incredibly fast. Space has transitioned into an active, strategic, military battleground. Today, we're unpacking the realities of modern space warfare, drawing directly from defense analyses, academic research, and policy papers from around the globe to show you exactly what's unfolding in the new global frontier.
To really grasp this massive geopolitical shift, we're going to move spatially, starting in Earth's orbit and making our way all the way to the moon. We'll cover the silent space battlefield, check out Russia's orbital stalkers, look at the militarization of Starlink, dive into the race for lunar control, and finally, talk about governing the high frontier.
All right, kicking things off with part 1, the silent space battlefield. Let's see how this new type of conflict actually operates in practice.
So, when we ask if space is the next battlefield, you kind of have to forget about Hollywood blockbusters with explosions and lasers tearing ships apart. The reality of modern space warfare is far less cinematic. But honestly, it's arguably much more dangerous because of just how deeply integrated these targets are into our daily lives.
The crucial point here is that modern space warfare is almost entirely silent. It's heavily focused on functional failure. Defense analysts point out that the goal today isn't necessarily to blow up a satellite. That just creates a massive debris field that threatens everyone's assets in orbit, even your own. Instead, the focus is on soft disruption, basically bricking the satellite so it becomes a useless floating piece of metal. And this creates a complete nightmare for legal attribution because it is incredibly difficult to prove who actually pressed the button.
According to defense analysis from PMF-IAS, this silent warfare relies heavily on 4 main tricks: cyber intrusions, signal jamming, GPS spoofing, and using directed energy to blind satellite sensors. Just think back to the 2022 cyber attack on the Viasat network, which severely crippled communications across Europe right at the onset of the conflict in Ukraine. We're also seeing frequent GPS spoofing in areas like the Black Sea, beaming out fake location signals to confuse aircraft and ships. There are even instances of laser dazzling, where directed energy is blasted up from the ground to literally blind the optical sensors of surveillance satellites as they pass overhead.
And this right here perfectly illustrates why this matters to you. Over 4 billion devices down here on Earth rely on these highly vulnerable satellites for navigation, defense, and over 90% of our global financial transactions. A successful coordinated attack on this silent battlefield wouldn't just mean a military goes blind, it means global shipping halts, nearly 100,000 daily flights are grounded, financial markets absolutely freeze. The stakes are, quite literally, astronomical.
Moving on to part 2, Russia's orbital stalkers. Let's dive into our first specific case study on the invisible maneuvers happening right now in geostationary orbit.
To understand this theater, we need to talk about RPOs, or close proximity maneuvers. Now, geostationary orbit is where satellites effectively stay fixed over the exact same spot on Earth. Historically, satellites just stayed in their designated lanes. But now, with advanced maneuverability, a spacecraft can deliberately navigate to park right next to another object. And that capability is inherently dual use. You can use it to refuel a friendly satellite, or you can use it to spy on a rival.
RAND research highlights a really stark contrast here. Standard satellite inspections are totally normal. Even commercial companies do them to check for damage, passing by, snapping a picture, and moving on. But Russia's highly secretive Luch satellites have been doing something entirely different. They are literally stalking commercial European satellites, specifically the ones providing secure bandwidth to European militaries. They shadow them for months at a time, sometimes creeping within just 5 kilometers. Analysts suggest they're acting as signals intelligence systems, intercepting secure command links. It's a slow, covert mapping operation that mirrors the hybrid campaigns against undersea fiber optic cables back on Earth.
All right, part 3, the militarization of Starlink. Let's drop further down into low Earth orbit, where commercial megaconstellations are meeting combat. Synthesizing Chinese academic research published in the Journal of Intelligence, we can see exactly how SpaceX's Starlink has been increasingly integrated into the U.S. Space Force, Air Force, and Army.
While the public mostly knows Starlink as a civilian internet provider, this research shines a bright light on its deep military roots. SpaceX has contracts with the Space Force for missile tracking, they've run connectivity tests with Air Force fighter jets, and the Army has used it in live-fire exercises where it took just 20 seconds to process data through Starlink to execute a strike. SpaceX even launched a military-specific variant called Starshield, purely to handle classified data.
Chinese defense researchers note that this dual-use militarization gives the United States a highly resilient, one-sided intelligence advantage over its adversaries. Because Starlink is made up of thousands of separate nodes, it's incredibly difficult to destroy. Take out a few satellites, and the network just instantly reroutes. The research argues that this distributed, low-cost network enables constant global surveillance, effectively giving the military a unidirectionally transparent view of the battlefield. Put simply, they can see everything their enemy does, while the enemy remains totally blind.
To really see why militaries are obsessed with this tech, just look at the staggering speed advantage a constellation like Starlink offers. The Chinese research notes tests where Starlink achieved airborne connection speeds of around 610 megabits per second. Compare that to the standard 50 megabits of traditional airborne systems, or the absolute crawl of 5 megabits from older military satellites. This massive leap in bandwidth allows for rapid data transfer, fueling new decentralized combat strategies like mosaic warfare, where thousands of interconnected sensors and autonomous drones share real-time data without a single hiccup.
Which brings us to part 4, the race for lunar control. Let's move way out past Earth's orbit and see how this builds toward the ultimate strategic high ground, the Moon. According to policy analysis by the Mitchell Institute, the US and China are locked in an enduring competition to secure long-term positional advantage and critical resources on the lunar surface. We are absolutely no longer in a Cold War space race that ends with just planting a flag. The modern race is a marathon to establish a sustained human presence, control logistics lines from Earth to deep space, and ultimately harvest the resources of the lunar poles. The winner of this race will likely set the rules and economic norms for the entire future of space.
And this analysis comes with a pretty stark warning. China's unified, military-led lunar ambitions could ultimately outpace the United States. The paper points out that China's space program is directed by the People's Liberation Army, using a military-civilian fusion strategy, where every single advancement has an inherent military capability. And they've been consistently hitting their milestones perfectly on time. In contrast, the US strictly splits its efforts. NASA handles civilian exploration, while the Space Force handles unmanned security. The Mitchell Institute argues that this strict divide, coupled with shifting political visions and inconsistent funding over the decades, leaves the U.S. at a real disadvantage.
To enforce positive norms and protect assets, the paper argues the U.S. must eventually deploy Guardians to space under Title X authorities. That is the strict legal framework required for actual overt military and combat operations. Currently, even if NASA astronauts were caught in a high-stakes conflict on the Moon, they simply don't possess the legal authority, the training, or the equipment of warfighters. The Mitchell Institute is advocating for the creation of a military human spaceflight program right within the Space Force, arguing that hard power will ultimately matter in space, just as it has in every other domain of human exploration throughout history. Finally, Part 5, Governing the High Frontier. With the stakes spanning from the safety of our cell phones down here all the way to future lunar bases up there, let's zoom out to the global response.
Policy analysts from all our sources agree on one thing: we urgently need updated global governance. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty does prohibit weapons of mass destruction in space, which is great, but it is vastly outdated when it comes to modern cyber warfare and commercial mega-constellations. Analysts are calling for binding international laws that explicitly define exactly when a space cyber attack equals a use of force. They're pushing for mandatory secure-by-design manufacturing to protect satellites from getting hacked before they even leave the launch pad. And practically speaking, we need strict orbital traffic rules and a total ban on debris-generating anti-satellite weapon tests to make sure these orbits remain usable for everyone.
As space firmly transitions from a peaceful scientific void into a highly active strategic domain, we want to leave you with a critical thought. Can our international diplomacy actually evolve fast enough to keep the stars from becoming the next active war zone? The technology is accelerating, the assets we rely on every day are vulnerable, and geopolitical competition is definitely heating up. Understanding these dynamics is the very first step in ensuring that the new global frontier remains a place of promise rather than peril. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep looking up and stay curious.